The following post was archived from a ghost hunting website. It is no longer visible, however, an anonymous user claiming to be a moderator was able to submit this record. The following is presented unedited. I make videos about exploring abandoned and haunted places. Or rather, I used to. You see, I have a channel online where I uploaded videos of myself going to abandoned places, usually ones that are said to have some level of paranormal activity, except mine are all fake. Most people don't actually believe in ghosts. Just about anything can be explained rationally, but despite that, paranormal videos still get a lot of views online. Some people enjoy seeing old buildings and wondering what could be living in them, while others like to try to debunk so-called paranormal stuff. It makes for a pretty low-effort genre for content, and a way to make some extra money through ad revenue. You could count me among the people that criticize these ghost videos, looking for things to prove that they were staged. After watching enough of those, I had the idea to grab my camera that I got from my uncle and set out to make some investigation videos of my own. First, I would try to find some building that's empty and not lived in. Then I would grab my camera and revisit the location at nightfall. It's pretty easy to do as long as you don't try to trespass into someone else's property, and I would make sure to scour the area first to make sure there weren't any squatters around either, because you never know what can happen with those kind of interactions. After I stake my claim, it's about setting the scene. I tried to think up some potential tragic story to tie to the place, like a rumor that someone may have killed themselves or a child passed away due to illness and now their spirit roams the area. If the place wasn't quite derelict enough, I broke a window or knocked a hole in the wall, maybe throw some trash around for clutter, and added some basic graffiti to the walls. After that, it was down to the actual shoot. I planned what rooms to go in and in what order, what angles to capture footage from, what to say at certain points, where events would occur at. Most of the so-called ghost stuff is relatively easy to pull off. Tie a thin wire to a chair, then tug it on your leg to give it the illusion of it being moved by a poltergeist, leave a door open just a crack so the wind can push it open or closed. I could even edit in whispers to make people think a spirit is speaking into the camera mic, or add a shadow figure somewhere for an easy jump scare. I would also try to call out to any ghosts that I think would be nearby, then act like some kind of ghost event is occurring. It was almost like making a home movie. Some people are able to recognize that the videos were set up, but they watch them anyway, giving my videos more and more views each time. As long as I wasn't obvious with the fakeness of it and able to keep finding new locations, it was a pretty good gig for a while. Helped me afford textbooks at least. However, one investigation that went awry was all I needed to find out that spirits do in fact exist, and they really don't want us messing with them. One day I was looking for ideas of new places to check out on a message board for so-called paranormal hotspots. While browsing, I saw one post that had a lot of replies. This user in particular described a very specific place in such vivid detail, I honestly started believing what they said about it being haunted. The user described an old cemetery that exists in the middle of a large stretch of woods. No one knows when it was built or why, and those that have seen it say that it must be centuries old. There's no way to get exact coordinates because GPS programs can't track the place, and drones end up losing power if they get anywhere close. You have to go in on foot and hope that you find it, and even then the woods around the area are so thick you may find yourself getting lost in the process. If you are somehow able to find the place, they say that you'll bear witness to things that no mortal eyes are meant to see. If you can live to tell the tale, that is, as the place is said to be a proving ground for various monsters. The poster wrote it with such certainty, I thought it had to have been something out of a storybook. I read the instructions they provided and noticed the area was actually within driving distance to me. Normally, I'd pass over anything that doesn't have a findable location, but I was having a hard time finding new spots to shoot at the time. So I planned a trip the following afternoon to check the place out. Since this cemetery didn't exactly have an address, I knew I couldn't do my usual pre-recording check of the area. Instead, my objective was to see if this place was even real to begin with. It was about an hour ride, but I was able to find a spot that was best to get out at, parking my car in a breakdown lane on the freeway. Once settled, I grabbed my gear, camera, food, water, and my scene-setting items, and ventured forth. It was just reaching sundown when I'd started walking, but I thought I would be able to do a quick enough search to be out before nightfall. What I hadn't anticipated was how quickly darkness descended on these particular woods. The area around the freeway itself was fairly clear, but when I got amongst the trees, I realized just how hard to navigate it actually was. I had my phone out with my GPS to keep track of what direction I was going in case I needed to get back to my car. Everything seemed to be going normally, and it felt like it'd just be a regular outing if I could just find the damn place. But then things started getting, well, weird. The first thing to happen was my phone completely losing its GPS tracking. The forum posting mentioned this, so it wasn't that much of a surprise, and at the time I rationed that there was just no signal due to the remoteness of the area. However, this wasn't just about losing cellular signal. My marker was bouncing all over the screen from one direction to the other, never settling on a singular spot. I put my phone away and grabbed my manual compass instead. Only the compass was also going haywire. The needle just kept moving in different directions as if it was possessed. At this point, it was almost completely dark, and I had to pull out my industrial flashlight just to see where I was going. My instincts told me to turn back, but I figured I was this far in anyway, so against any kind of better judgment, I pushed forward. A fog started to roll in not too long after that experience, or rather, it manifested. It was a thick fog too, one where you could barely see past the end of your arm. It was at this time where I really should have started to realize that something was wrong, but I just attributed it to the cold air coming in. There was a rational explanation for everything, right? I was walking for what felt like hours, and I was getting to a point where it felt better to cut my losses and start heading back. But then, the fog finally started to clear out, and I caught a glimpse of something. The first thing I saw after being surrounded by nothing but trees, leaves, and fog for so long was a singular stone cross planted in the ground. Examining it closer, I was able to confirm that it was indeed a very old-looking tombstone. I then spotted a rounded one that became visible not too far from it. Then another shape after that, and another, and another. Finally, the trees started to thin out, and the fog was clearing enough where I could see what was in front of me for the first time in a long while. And what I saw made me feel like an actual paranormal investigator for the first time since I started doing this whole thing. I had actually found it. The abandoned cemetery in question. I was surprised it took me so long just to find the place, and I thought that I must have just gotten turned around a bunch of times due to not having a functioning compass. It filled a surprisingly large area, so much that I had a hard time believing there was so little documentation of it. The weird thing was, the structures themselves looked old, but they seemed to be very well maintained. Outside of some moss covering some fountain statues and some vines growing on some of the larger structures, the place was surprisingly well intact. It felt like a time capsule of sorts. There was nothing indicating that it was haunted though. In fact, some spots actually looked to have been repaired. I wondered if it was used as a haunt attraction that was left behind once it served its original purpose. It was already getting late by this point though, so I grabbed my gear and immediately got busy. I was already thinking of catchy titles in my mind that would bring attention to the video once it got uploaded. Legendary gravesite found! Most haunted place ever! Something like that. Making clickbait titles is an art form in and of itself. The prep work was easy enough since the place already looked pretty creepy, but I did do my usual alterations. I broke one arm off of a wooden grave marker to give a better idea of how old the place was, and I scattered some trash in random spots from the refreshments I had along the way. I planned to pretend some teenagers made a mess of the place, picking some trash up while recording and playing the Good Samaritan. I also grabbed a spray can and made some basic graffiti on one side of the mausoleum. Then I smudged it to make sure it didn't look recent. Once I had finished laying the groundwork, I grabbed my camera and got to recording. I started off as I usually did. Introduce the place, give some theoretical history about it, the usual deal. I started walking the grounds, showing all the headstones, gradually making my way through the burial plots, making sure to film the trash and graffiti as planned. I even found a couple spots where I could easily edit in a ghostly shadow somewhere in post and pretend I never actually saw it in person. It was going so well, and I was certain that I had a hit in the making. Even without the stage stuff, this was going to be something that was going to get me a lot of views. But then it started going very, very wrong. The first sign that something was off came from the trash I had scattered. Walking towards a set of graves, I recognized a food wrapper had suddenly appeared at my feet, one of the snacks I had earlier. Except, it was one that I had placed down a few yards in the other direction. There was no way the wind could have blown it directly into my walking path, right? I turned, and another food wrapper appeared in my path. I turned again, and the empty bottle of my drink appeared. I was legitimately getting weirded out, which probably would have been apparent in the recording. Trying to avoid looking down to the ground, I moved elsewhere. I then went to the mausoleums. I found one that was locked, but I was able to force it open with enough brute force since the lock seemed pretty rusted. Despite the cobwebs and a thin layer of dust in some areas, this one seemed incredibly well kept. I spotted some coffins laying out in the open, kicking them open with my boot to see if any had skeletons inside. Surprisingly, there were no bodies in any of them. I remarked out loud that they looked like they were even used fairly recently. I wondered if maybe some goth weirdos found this place and used it for their role-playing game. Continuing to explore the building, I found something very notable. It looked like something was written on one of the walls. I took a closer look, shining my flashlight onto the space. I then realized something that shook me to my core. It was the same graffiti that I did on the outside of this same building. I began to panic, running deeper inward. I felt like I was losing my mind. Reaching the end of the hall, there was a wall with a broken coffin sitting in front of it. The graffiti again appeared, but this time, I didn't recognize the writing. Shining my flashlight on it, I saw a singular, coherent sentence. "You shouldn't be here." My fight-or-flight instincts kicked in at that point, and I dashed out as quickly as I could, almost tripping over one of the open coffins in the process. This was the first time I had ever encountered something that I didn't have a rational explanation for, and while I'm pretty sure I was still recording the whole thing, uploading the video was the last thing on my mind at that moment. Getting back outside, I looked around to try to find a direction, any direction to go in. But then my eyes settled on something. A small cat. Here, of all places, with fur as black as the night itself. The only way I would have been able to notice it at all in the darkness was because its eyes reflected the glare of my flashlight. I slowly approached it, wondering why it would be here of all places. However, once I got within petting distance, the cat quickly changed its demeanor. It stood up on both of its hind legs as if it was a person and pointed a claw directly at me, giving a loud and shrill shriek that echoed in the night, causing me to stumble backwards, falling on my rear. I continued holding my camera like it was my lifeline. As if that was some kind of cue, ghostly blue flames started to burst from torches at various spots, giving an unnatural light that illuminated the entirety of the area, and I got a good look at the grounds for the first time since arriving. It was truly expansive, larger than several city blocks and dotted with graves both covered and opened up. Various structures covered in vines came into view, statues of varying sizes, an intact sidewalk, a larger building than the distance that looked like a funeral home, and more. The sight was equal parts incredible and terrifying. But then they came. The inhabitants of the place. The first figure that caught my eye was a woman walking out from one of the crypts. She looked fairly young, wearing clothes that seemed to have been bought from a thrift store, but her lightly blue-colored skin and general demeanor reminded me of a haunt actor. The closer I looked at the woman that now stood just a few feet away from me, there were definitely some aspects of her that special effects makeup clearly could not do. Her skin was a translucent shade of blue, and where her left eye should have been was instead a massive hole of pure blackness, along with some melted flesh along her face, like she just came out of an inferno. A coffin lid then kicked open not far from me, and a masculine figure arose from the opened grave. This man was very heavily emaciated, his skin stretched across very visible bones, and yet he carried himself with no problems at all. Another figure came out from one of the mausoleums, this one carrying what appeared to be a skull in one hand with similarly skeletal arms, and what looked like an extremely long spinal column in the other, cracking it like a whip. I couldn't spot any costume alterations that would give away the fact that the skull the woman carried was a prop. More monsters appeared one after another. All were terrifying to behold, and they were all encroaching on my position, as the cat continued to hiss and growl in front of me like some kind of guard beast from hell itself. I had nowhere to go, but I was still holding on to the possibility that this was some kind of elaborate prank. Then a voice rang out. First voice I had heard that night that was not my own. "Ah, we got a live one here!" One last figure flew down right in front of me, landing between myself and the growling cat, their back to me. They were tall and lithe, yet their outfit was surprisingly modern, looking like they had just gotten out of a punk rock concert and bearing a mohawk to match. I had wondered if this person somehow forgot their own costume, noticing the skeletal-looking arms that very well could have been printed arm wraps. The cat ceased its growls, went back on all fours, and proceeded to rub itself against the new arrival's boots, who then gave it gentle head scratches. For some reason, the gesture made me feel slightly more at ease. But then, the figure looked back at me, giving me a full glimpse of who they were and instilling me with the realization that this was no prank, and that these weren't actors. To start with, they had no recognizable facial features. Strings of flesh were falling over places where there should have been eyes, a nose, and a mouth. Their skeleton was clearly visible underneath their pale skin, and I could feel a menacing aura exuding from them as they walked to where I sat on the ground, carrying themselves in such a way to establish that they didn't see me as a threat, but rather an annoyance. Another investigator, huh?" the ghostly figure said with a scoff. They then kneeled down in front of me and casually grasped the camera from my hand. I couldn't even muster the need to contest them as they lifted it out of my shaking palm, proceeding to inspect it like it was a strange artifact, then utilizing the attached strap to drape it around their neck. You're not the first of your type to find this place." Reaching behind them, they then pulled out one of the food wrappers that had chased me earlier, and the piece of the wooden cross I had broken off as part of my prep work. I could feel a cold sweat dripping down the side of my face as realization began to sink in that I have made several mistakes this evening, leaving my dorm room being one of them. "But you're definitely one of the more brazen ones we've had come in. Do you usually make a habit of trashing other people's homes?" The food wrapper then ignited in a ghostly flame that appeared seemingly from nowhere, and in an instant, the wrapper no longer existed in this world. The ghostly figure looked back down to me once more and continued. "You know, it's funny. Normally, people like you have a hard time finding this place. It's all because of the woods that surround these grounds. They have to let you in. We have no actual power over them, and it's almost like they have a personality of their own. Perhaps they sense something in you. Ignorance, rather than malice. Maybe they wanted to ensure that you learned a valuable lesson from all this." The ghostly figure then waved a hand. I was confused by the gesture at first, until I felt something attach itself to my arm. Checking to see, I saw the graffiti that was chasing me earlier suddenly placed onto my own skin like a brand. "Know this, mortal," they continued, their face leaning in dangerously close to my own, allowing me to see the dark recesses of their eye holes, and I could feel them staring into my very being. "This place is meant to be a haven for our kind, away from prying eyes. The denizens here mean no ill will to the living. However, that doesn't mean we won't defend ourselves if we need to. We will ask you once, and only once. Clean up your mess, and leave this place. Find somewhere else to do your content. Oh, and do be more respectful to the dead. They aren't mere playthings for your amusement. The fingers on her hand that previously held the food wrapper began to grow in length, longer and longer, merging with their black fingernails until they became dark claws that looked more than capable of rending flesh and bone. They then spoke in a different voice, one that felt like it was made out of pure malice and echoed across the grounds, ghostly flames suddenly burning where their eyes would be like two lanterns in the dead of night.
If you somehow find this place again and are found wanting, then you will not be given a second chance.
After that threat, the other beings opened the path for me at long last. Seeing the route laid before me, I immediately got to my feet and ran. All the litter I had dropped was gathered not too far from where I was being interrogated at, so I quickly grabbed every single scrap and shoved it all into my backpack. I then dashed as quickly as I could out of that place. Perhaps those woods really were obfuscating my path previously, as I was able to leave them in short order and get back to my car, which was thankfully still sitting at the side of the road. I got in, started the ignition, and drove. I had to get away from there as fast as possible. Even when I was able to finally make it to the safety of my dorm room, I didn't go to sleep right away out of pure fear. What if one of those things followed me home? It wasn't until the sun started to come up that I was finally able to get some sleep, though more out of pure exhaustion than anything else. I didn't wake up until later that afternoon. I wondered if it was all a dream because of how surreal it all seemed. Looking to my desk, I expected to see my camera resting on it, only it wasn't. Confused, I then looked down at my arms, and I broke out in a sweat once more. I realized that it wasn't a dream. The graffiti that got transferred to my skin was still there, marking me for my misdeeds. It stayed on there for 3 days, no matter how hard I scrubbed at it. After that, I quit making fake ghost videos. I never made any kind of update explaining what happened, and I couldn't bring myself to explain. Not like anyone would actually believe me if I did. Despite that, I still had trouble sleeping. I was constantly looking over my shoulder to make sure I wasn't being followed, and I had barely gone out except for class and to get food. I kept having nightmares of that person staring me in the face and replaying the warning they gave me in my head. I was an absolute wreck for a good while. I finally decided to write this out, if only just to give me some kind of peace of mind. I also wanted to share this as a warning. Whether you choose to believe my story or not, I implore any other paranormal investigators out there that are reading this, real or fake, take great care if you dare to visit that abandoned cemetery. If the woods surrounding it allow you in, then be sure to show the place the utmost respect. I was fortunate to be allowed to leave, despite my actions. Others may not be, especially if they make the same mistakes I did or worse. They did not seem the least bit hesitant to add more souls to their ranks. Needless to say, I do believe in ghosts and the undead now, and they deserve to be treated with respect, just like you and me. This message was updated by the original poster a month later with the following. Update. I was recently able to get a part-time job as a groundskeeper at a local cemetery. It's not glamorous, but it helps cover my tuition, and it actually feels a bit more rewarding than making fake ghost videos. In fact, the management has taken notice of how much work I've been putting in and offered me more work when I'm on college break for the summer. I've also been taking freelance editing jobs in my spare time, making compilation videos and clips for streamers that they can share online. There's a very high demand for video editors right now, and I've been getting more work on that front due to the quality of my edits, so I'm at least putting those skills to better use. I suppose a part of me is hoping that if I can work up the courage and I do enough good deeds, the woods will allow me back into that cemetery so that I can give a proper apology for messing up the place. If somehow any of the undead from there are able to see this, I have no idea if you can get internet access or not, please know that I'm doing my best, and I hope you can forgive me for my foolishness. This was the last update before the thread itself was archived. The account that posted it has since been deleted. However, there was a singular reply that may have caused the thread to be hidden An anonymous user replied, "Glad to hear you're doing well. We're holding onto your camera if you ever want to come get it." There was an attached image of what looked like the original poster's camera, sitting next to a weathered grave. The thread itself was derailed by further replies, which is what led to it being closed and hidden by the moderation staff, according to the person that submitted it. An IP address was not able to be found for the anonymous user.